Michael Stone was born into a world that was, by all appearances, ordinary. His early years were spent in a modest home on the outskirts of New York City, a place where dreams often felt as far away as the skyline that shimmered in the distance. His father, James Stone, was a stern but loving man who worked long hours at a small construction company. His mother, Evelyn, was the heart of the home, a gentle soul whose warmth and kindness balanced the rigors of their daily lives. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they had enough, and Evelyn made sure that their house always felt like a haven. From a young age, Michael was different. There was a fire in him, a spark that set him apart from the other kids in the neighborhood. While they were content to play in the streets, chasing after the ice cream truck, or kicking a soccer ball around, Michael was always looking for something more. He was the kind of child who would sit in the back of the classroom, not out of disinterest, but because he was constantly thinking, dreaming, and planning. Teachers often remarked on his inquisitive nature, his ability to see the world in a way that seemed far beyond his years. James Stone noticed this in his son, and while he was proud, he was also wary. He knew how hard the world could be, how unforgiving it was to those who dared to dream too big. He had seen too many men broken by their ambitions, their hopes crushed under the weight of reality. So, he did what he thought was best. He tried to temper Michael's aspirations, to teach him the value of hard work and practicality. "Dreams are good, son," he would say, his voice heavy with the wisdom of a life hard lived. "But remember, they don't put food on the table." But Michael was not easily deterred. He took his father's lessons to heart, but he never let them extinguish the fire within him. If anything, they fueled it, made him more determined to prove that he could have it all, the dreams and the success. He became a voracious reader, devouring books about great men who had risen from nothing to build empires. He was particularly fascinated by the stories of business tycoons, men like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford, who had turned their visions into reality through sheer willpower and cunning. As Michael grew older, his ambitions only intensified. By the time he reached high school, he was already plotting his future, laying the groundwork for what he was certain would be a life of extraordinary success. He excelled academically, not just because he was smart, but because he knew that knowledge was power. He joined clubs, took on leadership roles, and sought out mentors who could teach him the secrets of success. He was a teenager with the mindset of a seasoned entrepreneur, always thinking several steps ahead. His peers admired him, even if they didn't always understand him. To them, he was the kid who had it all together, the one who seemed destined for greatness. But Michael didn't care about their admiration. He was focused on the bigger picture. He was already looking beyond high school, beyond the narrow confines of his current life, to the world that awaited him. The world of business, power, and limitless possibilities. The first real test of Michael's resolve came during his junior year of high school, when he decided to enter a statewide business competition. It was an event that attracted some of the brightest young minds in the state, all vying for a scholarship to the prestigious business program at Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For Michael, this was more than just a competition. It was an opportunity to prove himself, to show that he had what it took to stand out in a field of the best and brightest. The competition required participants to develop a comprehensive business plan, complete with market analysis, financial projections, and a strategy for growth. While other students struggled with the complexity of the task, Michael thrived. He spent countless hours researching, analyzing data, and crafting a plan that was as bold as it was meticulous. His idea was simple, yet innovative, a tech startup that would revolutionize the way people connected with local businesses. He called it Connect Hub. The day of the competition arrived, and Michael walked into the room with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he was prepared. The judges were seasoned entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, men and women who had seen it all. But as Michael presented his plan, something about his vision caught their attention. It wasn't just the idea itself. It was the passion, the conviction with which he spoke. He made them believe that Connect Hub wasn't just a concept. It was the future. When the winners were announced, there was no surprise that Michael's name was at the top of the list. He had not only won the competition, but had also secured the scholarship to Wharton, a dream come true. But for Michael, this was just the beginning. The victory was sweet, but it was the door it opened that excited him the most. He knew that Wharton would be his launching pad, the place where he would refine his skills, build his network, and start his journey to the top. That as he prepared to leave for college, his parents were filled with a mix of pride and anxiety. Evelyn, ever the optimist, believed that her son was destined for great things. She saw in him the same qualities that had drawn her to James all those years ago: strength, determination, and an unwavering sense of purpose. But James was more cautious. He knew how ruthless the business world could be, and he worried that Michael's drive might lead him down a path of loneliness and disillusionment. "Remember who you are, son," he said to Michael the night before he left. "Don't lose yourself in the pursuit of success." Michael nodded, but his mind was already miles away, in the bustling halls of Wharton, where he would soon be among the brightest minds in the country. The next chapter of his life was about to begin, and he was ready to embrace it with open arms. Wharton was everything Michael had imagined and more. The campus buzzed with energy, a hive of ambition and intellect. Here, he was surrounded by people who shared his drive, his hunger for success. But even among this elite group, Michael stood out. He quickly established himself as a force to be reckoned with, excelling in his classes and impressing his professors with his insight and determination. That he immersed himself in the world of business, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. He studied the strategies of the greats, dissecting their successes and failures to understand what made them tick. He spent long hours in the library, poring over case studies, analyzing market trends, and working on his own business ideas. But Michael wasn't just a scholar. He was a doer. He joined the Wharton Business Association, where he quickly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming its president in his junior year. Under his leadership, the association flourished. Michael introduced new initiatives, such as networking events with industry leaders, workshops on entrepreneurship, and an annual business plan competition that attracted students from across the country. His efforts did not go unnoticed. By the time he was a senior, Michael was already being courted by some of the biggest firms on Wall Street. But he had other plans. During his time at Wharton, Michael had continued to develop Connect Hub. What had started as a high school competition project had grown into a fully fledged business idea, one that he was determined to bring to life. He spent his weekends and evenings working on the startup, meeting with potential investors, refining his pitch, and building a team of like-minded individuals who shared his vision. By the time he graduated, Connect Hub was more than just an idea. It was a company on the brink of launch. Graduation came with a whirlwind of emotions. Michael stood on the stage, diploma in hand, looking out at the sea of faces, his classmates, his professors, his parents. He had done it. He had achieved what he had set out to do. But as the applause rang in his ears, he knew that this was just another step on the long road ahead. The real challenge was just beginning. With his degree in hand and a freshly minted startup ready to go, Michael moved back to New York City, the place where his journey had begun. The city had always been a source of inspiration for him, a symbol of opportunity and ambition. Now it was his battleground. He rented a small office space in a tech hub in Manhattan and got to work. The early days were tough, long hours, tight budgets, and constant pressure to deliver. But Michael thrived under the challenge. He had always believed that adversity was the crucible in which greatness was forged. Connect Hub launched in the summer of 2010, and it quickly gained traction. The platform was exactly what the market needed: a simple, intuitive way for people to connect with local businesses, from restaurants to retail stores to service providers. Users loved the convenience, and businesses appreciated the boost in visibility and customer engagement. Within a few months, Connect Hub had thousands of users and had attracted the attention of several venture capital firms. Investors were eager to get in on the ground floor, and Michael found himself in the enviable position of choosing who he wanted to partner with. After careful consideration, he secured a significant round of funding from a top VC firm, one that shared his vision for the company's future. With the new capital, Connect Hub expanded rapidly, adding new features, growing its user base, and entering new markets. Michael's dream was becoming a reality, and he was at the helm, guiding the ship with a steady hand. But success came at a cost. The more Connect Hub grew, the more demanding Michael's life became. He worked around the clock, barely taking time to eat or sleep. His social life, which had never been a priority, dwindled to almost nothing. Friends and family saw less and less of him, and when they did, they noticed a change. Michael was becoming more intense, more driven, but also more isolated. He had always been focused, but now it was as if nothing else mattered. The company was everything to him, and he was willing to sacrifice whatever it took to see it succeed. AS Connect Hub entered its third year. It had become a household name in the tech world. The company was valued in the hundreds of millions, and Michael was hailed as one of the brightest young entrepreneurs in the country. He was featured in magazines, interviewed on television, and invited to speak at conferences. The world saw him as a success story, a testament to what could be achieved with hard work and determination. But behind the scenes, Michael was beginning to feel the strain. The pressure to maintain the company's growth, to meet the expectations of investors, and to stay ahead of the competition was relentless. Michael had always thrived on challenge, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the risks greater. He found himself constantly on edge, always worrying about the next quarter, the next product launch, the next big move. He started to doubt himself, to wonder if he was really as capable as everyone believed. The fire that had once driven him began to burn out, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that he couldn't shake. It was during this time that Michael's father passed away. James Stone had been battling cancer for several years, and while Michael had known the end was near, it still hit him like a ton of bricks. He flew home for the funeral, his first trip back in months. As he stood by his father's grave, the memories of their last conversation came flooding back. "Don't lose yourself in the pursuit of success," his father had said. And now, as Michael looked at the man who had shaped so much of who he was, he realized that he had done exactly that. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of Michael's life. He returned to New York, but his heart wasn't in it. He went through the motions, attending meetings, making decisions, but his mind was elsewhere. The company continued to grow, but Michael felt more disconnected from it than ever. He began to question everything: his goals, his values, his purpose. What was the point of all this success if it left him feeling empty and alone? One night, after another long day at the office, Michael found himself wandering the streets of Manhattan. It was late, the city quieter than usual, the streets almost deserted. He walked for hours, his mind a swirl of thoughts and emotions. Eventually, he found himself in front of a small park, a place he hadn't been to since he was a child. He sat down on a bench, the same bench where his father had once taken him to talk about life, and he let the tears come. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to feel, to mourn his father, to grieve for the life he had lost, and to confront the emptiness that had taken its place as the night wore on. Something shifted inside Michael. Sitting there in the darkness, he realized that he had been so focused on building his empire that he had forgotten why he had started in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about making a difference, about creating something meaningful. He had wanted to prove to the world, to himself, that he could achieve greatness. But in doing so, he had lost sight of the things that truly mattered: family, friends, love, and the simple joys of life. The next day, Michael walked into the office with a newfound sense of clarity. He called a meeting with his executive team and announced that he was stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the company. He wasn't quitting, but he needed time to regroup, to figure out what he really wanted from life. It was a shock to everyone, but Michael was resolute. He had built Connect Hub from the ground up, but now it was time to let others take the reins. He needed to find himself again, to rediscover the fire that had driven him all those years ago. Michael spent the next several months traveling, reconnecting with old friends, and spending time with his mother. He visited the places that had inspired him as a young man, the libraries, the parks, the streets of New York that had once been filled with possibility. Slowly, he began to heal. He realized that his father's words had been a warning, not a condemnation. James Stone had known the dangers of ambition, but he had also known the importance of balance, of living a life that was rich in more ways than one. When Michael finally returned to Connect Hub, he was a different man. He was still ambitious, still driven, but he had learned to temper his desires with wisdom, to balance his work with the other aspects of his life. He refocused the company, shifting its mission to include more social impact initiatives, and he made a conscious effort to create a work culture that valued not just success, but also well-being and community that in the years that followed, Michael Stone continued to build his empire, but he did so with a new sense of purpose. He became known not just for his business acumen, but for his commitment to making the world a better place. And while he never forgot the lessons of his youth, he no longer let them define him. He had found a way to achieve his dreams without losing himself in the process. And in doing so, he had become not just a successful businessman, but a truly fulfilled human being. The sun had barely risen when Michael Stone arrived at his office on the 56th floor of the sleek glass skyscraper that housed Connect Hub's headquarters. From the large windows that wrapped around his corner office, the view of New York City was breathtaking. The streets far below were just beginning to stir with the morning rush, and the city skyline stood against the pink hues of dawn, a reminder of the heights he had reached. But this morning, the view did little to calm his racing thoughts. Michael had always been an early riser, a habit drilled into him during his days at Wharton. He believed in the mantra that the early bird catches the worm, and this had served him well in his meteoric rise to the top. But today was different. Today, the familiar routine felt more like a desperate attempt to keep control of a situation that was rapidly slipping through his fingers, that he had always thrived under pressure, relishing the challenge of the high-stakes business world. From his early days at Wharton to the founding of Connect Hub, he had lived for the thrill of the chase, the adrenaline that came with each new challenge. But now, as he stood on the precipice of the biggest gamble of his life, he felt a gnawing unease in the pit of his stomach, a sensation he wasn't used to. The gamble he was contemplating wasn't just about money or market share. It was about his legacy, his very identity as a businessman. For years, Michael had been lauded as a visionary, a genius who had taken a simple idea and turned it into a billion-dollar enterprise. But the truth was, Connect Hub had hit a plateau. Growth had slowed, competition was fierce, and the company that had once been a disruptor was now at risk of being disrupted itself. Investors were growing impatient, the board was restless, and the pressure to innovate, to do something big, was mounting. Michael knew that playing it safe wasn't an option. In the world of tech startups, standing still was the same as moving backward. But the plan he was considering, the one that had kept him up night after night, was risky, unbelievably risky. It involved a bold acquisition, one that could catapult Connect Hub into a new stratosphere or bring it crashing down in spectacular fashion. The target was a smaller but rapidly growing company that specialized in artificial intelligence, a field Michael believed was the future. The problem was that this company was bleeding money, and integrating it into Connect Hub's operations would be a logistical nightmare. As he stood there, staring out at the city that had been the backdrop to his rise, Michael's mind raced through the possibilities, the potential outcomes. He had always prided himself on his ability to see the big picture, to anticipate market trends, and position himself accordingly. But this move was different. It wasn't just about seeing the future. It was about shaping it, about taking a leap of faith into the unknown. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a text from his CFO, Jessica, reminding him of the morning's board meeting. Jessica had been with him since the early days of Connect Hub, and if there was one person whose opinion Michael valued, it was hers. She was smart, tough, and had a knack for seeing through the noise to the heart of the matter. But even she was skeptical about this acquisition. "You're betting the farm, Michael," she had said during their last discussion. "If this goes south, it's not just the company on the line, it's everything you've built." Michael had brushed off her concerns at the time, confident in his vision. But now, as the meeting approached, her words echoed in his mind. Was he really willing to risk it all? Was this a calculated risk or a reckless gamble born out of desperation? The board meeting was set to begin in half an hour, and Michael knew he needed to get his head in the game. He turned away from the window and walked over to his desk, where a stack of documents awaited his review. The numbers were daunting. The acquisition would require a massive outlay of cash, which meant taking on significant debt. The potential rewards were huge, but so were the risks. And then there was the integration process, which could take years and would stretch Connect Hub's resources to the limit. Michael sat down and began to go over the numbers again, his mind methodically working through each scenario. He had always been good with numbers. His ability to see patterns and trends where others saw chaos was one of the things that had made him so successful. But this time, the numbers didn't tell the whole story. There were too many variables, too many unknowns that as he worked, his mind drifted back to the early days of Connect Hub. He remembered the excitement of those first few years, when every day brought new challenges and new opportunities. He had been younger then, full of energy and ambition, and the risks had seemed smaller, more manageable. But now, with the weight of the company on his shoulders, the stakes were higher, and the margin for error was razor thin. The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice came through, letting him know that the board members were beginning to arrive. Michael took a deep breath, closed the file in front of him, and stood up. This was it, the moment of truth. He had always thrived in high-pressure situations, and today would be no different. He would present his vision, lay out the plan, and convince the board that this was the right move. The boardroom was a sleek, modern space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The board members were already seated around the long, polished table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. These were men and women who had invested not just their money, but their trust in Michael. They had backed him from the beginning, believed in his vision, and now they were looking to him to lead them through this next challenge. Michael walked to the head of the table, greeted the board members, and took his seat. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to speak. The room was thick with tension, and Michael knew that what he said next could determine the future of the company. That he began by outlining the challenges Connect Hub was facing: the slowing growth, the increased competition, the need to innovate. He didn't sugarcoat the situation. He knew that the board appreciated his honesty. But then he shifted gears, talking about the opportunities that lay ahead, the potential for growth in the AI space, and how the acquisition could position Connect Hub as a leader in the industry. As he spoke, Michael watched the faces around the table. Some of the board members nodded in agreement. Others looked skeptical, and a few seemed downright alarmed. He knew he had to address their concerns, to show them that this wasn't just a gamble, but a calculated risk with a clear path to success. When he finished, there was a moment of silence as the board members absorbed what he had said. Then one of them, a seasoned investor named Richard, spoke up. Richard had been with Connect Hub from the beginning, and he was known for his bluntness. "This is a bold move, Michael," Richard said, his tone measured. "But it's also incredibly risky. We've all seen what happens to companies that overextend themselves. They either soar to new heights or crash and burn. What makes you so sure we'll be in the former category?" Michael had anticipated this question, and he was ready with an answer. He spoke about the research he had done, the team he had assembled, and the contingency plans that were in place. He laid out the timeline for the integration process, the milestones they would need to hit, and the potential return on investment. But as he spoke, he could sense that not everyone in the room was convinced. The discussion that followed was intense. The board members asked tough questions, poking holes in Michael's plan, raising concerns about the financials, the integration process, and the potential impact on the company's core business. Michael answered each question as best as he could, but he could feel the tension in the room rising. Finally, Jessica spoke up. She had been quiet for most of the meeting, listening to the discussion unfold. But now, she leaned forward, her expression serious. "Michael, you know I've always had your back," she said, her voice steady. "But this is a big risk, and we need to be sure it's the right one. You've built something incredible here, something that has the potential to change the world. But we can't afford to be reckless. We need to be smart about this." Her words hung in the air, and Michael knew that she was speaking not just for herself, but for many of the board members as well. They trusted him, but they also needed reassurance that this wasn't a leap into the dark. Michael took a deep breath and looked around the table. These were people he respected, people who had been with him through thick and thin. He knew they were right to be cautious, but he also knew that playing it safe wasn't an option. The world was changing, and if Connect Hub didn't change with it, they would be left behind. "I hear your concerns," Michael said, his voice calm but firm, "and I understand the risks. But I believe that this is the right move for the company. We've always been about innovation, about pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo. This acquisition is a chance for us to do that on a whole new level. Yes, it's risky, but the potential rewards are enormous." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he continued, "I've built this company from the ground up, and I've always had a clear vision of where we're going. This acquisition is a part of that vision. It's a bold move, but it's also a necessary one. If we want to continue to lead, to innovate, and to change the world, we need to take this step. I'm asking for your trust, your support, to help us take Connect Hub to the next level." The room was silent as the board members considered what he had said. Michael could see the wheels turning in their minds, the calculations being made. This was it, the moment that would decide the future of Connect Hub. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You've always been a risk taker, Michael, and that's what's gotten us this far. But this time, the stakes are higher than they've ever been. I think we all need some time to think about this, to weigh the risks and the rewards." There were nods of agreement around the table, and Michael knew that the decision wouldn't be made today. The board needed time, and he couldn't blame them. He had laid out his vision, made his case, and now it was up to them. The meeting ended, and the board members began to file out, some offering words of encouragement, others deep in thought. Michael watched them go, feeling a mix of emotions. He was confident in his vision, but he also knew that the road ahead would be challenging as he returned to his office. Michael couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that had settled over him. He had always been sure of himself, sure of his decisions. But this time, the stakes were higher, the risks greater, and the outcome far from certain. That he sat down at his desk, staring out at the city once again. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the streets below. Michael knew that he was standing at a crossroads, a moment that would define his career, his company, and his life. This was more than just a business decision. It was a test of his character, his vision, and his ability to lead. He had always believed that the greatest rewards came from the greatest risks, but now he was faced with a risk that could either solidify his legacy or bring it all crashing down as he sat there. Lost in thought, Michael's mind wandered back to his father, to the lessons he had learned at his side. James Stone had always taught him to be bold, to take chances, but also to be wise, to know when to push forward and when to hold back. It was a balance that Michael had always struggled with, and now, as he faced the biggest decision of his life, he wondered if he had finally found that balance, or if he was about to overstep. The days that followed were some of the longest and most stressful of Michael's life. The board deliberated, the financial teams crunched numbers, and Michael spent sleepless nights going over every detail of the plan. The weight of the decision hung over him like a dark cloud, and for the first time in his career, he began to doubt himself. He had always been a man of action, someone who thrived in the fast-paced world of tech startups. But now, he was forced to wait, to let others make decisions that would affect his company, his future. It was a position he wasn't used to, and it left him feeling powerless, adrift. The media got wind of the potential acquisition, and speculation ran wild. Analysts weighed in, investors called for reassurance, and the stock price wavered. Michael kept a low profile, avoiding the press and focusing on the task at hand. But the pressure was relentless, and he could feel the strain taking its toll. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the board made its decision. They had decided to move forward with the acquisition, but with conditions. There would be strict oversight, contingency plans, and milestones that needed to be met. It was a cautious approach, but one that Michael could live with. The deal was announced, and the reaction was mixed. Some hailed it as a bold move that would position Connect Hub as a leader in the AI space, while others saw it as a reckless gamble that could backfire. The stock price dipped, then slowly recovered, as the market digested the news. For Michael, the decision was a bittersweet victory. He had gotten what he wanted, but at a cost. The sleepless nights, the constant pressure, the strain on his relationships, it all weighed on him. He knew that the hard work was just beginning, that the road ahead would be long and challenging. But as he stood in his office, looking out at the city that had been the backdrop to his rise, Michael felt a sense of resolve. He had taken a risk, a leap into the unknown, and now it was time to see it through. He had always believed in the power of vision, of pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo. And now, with the biggest challenge of his career ahead of him, he was ready to prove that he had what it took to succeed. The future was uncertain, the risks were great, but Michael Stone was not a man who shied away from a challenge. He was a risk-taker, a visionary, and he was ready to lead Connect Hub into its next chapter, whatever it might hold. Michael Stone had always prided himself on his ability to handle pressure. It was a trait that had served him well over the years, propelling him to the top of the tech industry and earning him a reputation as one of the most formidable entrepreneurs of his generation. But as the months rolled on, following the acquisition of the AI company, Michael found himself in uncharted territory. The once familiar world of business, which he had navigated with confidence and precision, now felt like a labyrinth filled with unexpected twists and turns. The integration of the AI company into Connect Hub was proving to be far more challenging than Michael had anticipated. What was supposed to be a seamless transition had turned into a logistical nightmare. The AI team, brilliant but notoriously independent, clashed with Connect Hub's established culture. Their cutting-edge technology, while promising, was difficult to integrate into Connect Hub's existing platform. Deadlines were missed, budgets were exceeded, and tensions ran high. Michael was in the thick of it, working long hours, trying to keep the ship afloat. He was everywhere at once, meeting with engineers to troubleshoot technical issues, negotiating with the finance team to keep costs under control, and reassuring the board that everything was on track. But despite his best efforts, the situation continued to spiral out of control. The pressure was relentless, and it began to take its toll on Michael. He had always been known for his calm demeanor, his ability to remain composed under even the most stressful circumstances. But now, cracks were beginning to show. He was irritable, quick to anger, and prone to mood swings. The sleepless nights and constant stress were wearing him down, and those closest to him began to notice the change. Jessica, his CFO and confidant, was one of the first to voice her concerns. "Michael, you're pushing yourself too hard," she said one evening after a particularly grueling meeting. "You need to take a step back, or you're going to burn out." But Michael brushed off her concerns. There was too much at stake, too much riding on the success of the integration. He couldn't afford to slow down, not when the future of Connect Hub was on the line. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "I just need to get through this." But deep down, Michael knew that things were getting out of hand. The pressure was unlike anything he had ever experienced before, and it was starting to affect his judgment. He began to make decisions that, in hindsight, were rash and ill-considered. He pushed his team harder, demanding results that were increasingly difficult to achieve. He became obsessed with meeting deadlines, to the point where he started cutting corners, sacrificing quality for speed. That IT wasn't long before the cracks in the integration process became apparent to everyone. Bugs in the software, once a rare occurrence, became a regular headache. Customers began to complain about glitches, and the media caught wind of the growing unrest within the company. The stock price, which had been slowly recovering after the initial dip following the acquisition, began to slide again. The board, which had initially backed Michael's vision for the acquisition, started to lose confidence. Rumors of dissent began to circulate, with some members quietly questioning whether Michael was still the right person to lead the company through this crisis. The pressure on him was immense, and the more he tried to assert control, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. One evening, after yet another grueling day at the office, Michael returned home to his penthouse apartment in Manhattan. The city lights twinkled below, a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to envelop him. He stood by the window, staring out at the skyline, feeling more alone than he had in years. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he could bear it. As he stood there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jessica, urging him once again to take some time off. Michael stared at the screen, her words blurring as tears welled up in his eyes. He had always been so strong, so sure of himself. But now, standing at the edge of what felt like an abyss, he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going. The following weeks were a blur. The problems at Connect Hub continued to mount, and Michael's attempts to fix them became increasingly frantic. He was running on fumes, and everyone around him could see that he was on the brink of collapse. But Michael was too caught up in the whirlwind of work to realize just how close he was to the edge. Then, one day, everything came crashing down. IT started with a routine investor meeting. Michael had been up all night preparing, fueled by a toxic mix of coffee and anxiety. As he stood in front of the room, going through his presentation, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might faint. But he pushed through, determined to finish the presentation. But the pain didn't go away. It intensified, spreading down his arm and into his jaw. Panic set in as he realized what was happening. He was having a heart attack. The room erupted into chaos as Michael collapsed to the floor. Paramedics were called, and within minutes, he was being rushed to the hospital. The next few hours were a haze of pain and fear as doctors worked to stabilize him. By the time the worst was over, Michael was left weak, exhausted, and deeply shaken. As he lay in the hospital bed, staring up at the ceiling, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He had pushed himself too hard, taken on too much, and now he was paying the price. The company he had built, the empire he had created, was in jeopardy, and there was nothing he could do about it. For the first time in his life, Michael felt utterly powerless. The doctors told him he would need to take time off to recover, to avoid stress and focus on his health. But how could he do that when everything he had worked for was on the line? The thought of stepping back, of letting go, was terrifying. But as the days passed and the fog of exhaustion began to lift, Michael started to realize that he had no choice. He wasn't invincible. He was human, with limits like everyone else. And if he didn't take care of himself, there would be no company left to save. Part 2. The weight of solitude. Michael Stone's hospital stay was a stark reminder of his mortality. The sterile white walls, the incessant beeping of machines, the cold clinical atmosphere. It was a far cry from the high-octane world he was used to. But in those quiet moments of forced rest, he began to confront the realities he had been avoiding for so long. The truth was, Michael had been running on empty for years. His drive, his ambition, had propelled him to unimaginable heights, but it had also left him isolated, burnt out, and dangerously close to self-destruction. The heart attack had been a wake-up call, one that he couldn't afford to ignore. As he lay in the hospital bed, reflecting on the events that had led him there, Michael couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret. He had always prided himself on being in control, on being the master of his destiny. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. The pursuit of success had consumed him, leaving little room for anything else. His relationships had suffered. Friends and family had drifted away, unable to compete with the demands of his career. Even his closest confidant, Jessica, had grown distant in recent months, their once close friendship strained by the pressures of the job. Michael realized that he had been so focused on building his empire that he had neglected the people who mattered most. But as much as he regretted the toll his work had taken on his personal life, Michael knew that he couldn't change the past. What he could do, however, was take control of his future. And that meant making some difficult decisions. The first decision was to step back from the day-to-day operations of Connect Hub. It wasn't an easy choice. After all, the company was his life's work. But Michael knew that if he continued down the path he was on, he wouldn't have a life left to live. He needed to focus on his recovery, to rebuild his strength, both physically and mentally. Jessica was the first person he confided in about his decision. She visited him in the hospital, her concern evident in the lines of worry etched on her face. When Michael told her about his plan to step back, she didn't try to dissuade him. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I've been worried about you, Michael," she admitted. "I've seen how much this has been taking out of you. You need to do what's best for you. The company can survive without you for a while, but it can't survive without a healthy, focused leader." Her words were a balm to Michael's troubled mind. For so long, he had felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. But now, for the first time, he realized that he didn't have to carry it alone. With Jessica's support, Michael made the necessary arrangements to delegate his responsibilities. He appointed an interim CEO, a trusted colleague who had been with the company since its early days. It wasn't easy to let go, to trust someone else with the reins, but Michael knew it was the right thing to do. The second decision Michael made was to take a step back from the chaos of the city. New York had always been his home, the place where he had built his empire, but it was also a constant source of stress. The noise, the crowds, the relentless pace of life. It was all too much for him to handle in his current state, so he decided to retreat to a quieter place, a small town in upstate New York where he could focus on his recovery. It was a far cry from the bustling city, but that was exactly what Michael needed. The town was nestled in the mountains, surrounded by nature, with fresh air and a slower pace of life. It was the perfect place to heal, both physically and emotionally. The move was a significant change for Michael. For years, he had been at the center of the action, always in the thick of things. But now, as he settled into his new surroundings, he began to appreciate the peace and solitude. There were no meetings, no deadlines, no constant stream of emails demanding his attention. It was just him, alone with his thoughts, with nothing to distract him from the task at hand. Getting better. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Michael spent his time walking in the woods, breathing in the fresh mountain air, and reflecting on his life. He began to see things more clearly, to understand the toll that his relentless drive had taken on him. It wasn't just his health that had suffered. His relationships, his sense of self, his happiness had all been casualties of his ambition. As the weeks went by, Michael began to feel a sense of renewal. The fog of exhaustion that had clouded his mind started to lift, and he found himself thinking more clearly, more rationally. He began to see the mistakes he had made, the ways in which he had let his ambition blind him to the bigger picture. But rather than dwelling on those mistakes, Michael chose to learn from them, that he realized that success wasn't just about building a company or amassing wealth. It was about finding balance, about living a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. For so long, he had equated success with hard work and sacrifice, but now he understood that true success was about more than just professional achievements. It was about taking care of oneself, about nurturing relationships, about finding joy in the little things. This realization was a turning point for Michael. For the first time in years, he began to think about his life beyond Connect Hub. He started to explore new interests, to reconnect with old friends, and to rediscover the parts of himself that he had neglected for so long. It was a slow process, but each small step forward felt like a victory. That Michael's physical health also began to improve. The rest and relaxation were doing wonders for his body, and he felt stronger, more energized with each passing day. The doctors were pleased with his progress, but they cautioned him not to rush back into his old life too quickly. He needed to give himself time to heal, to fully recover before he even thought about returning to the pressures of the corporate world. And so, Michael continued to take things slow. He focused on his recovery, on rebuilding his strength, both physically and mentally. He spent time in nature, meditating, reading, and reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He began to feel more at peace with himself, more in tune with what he truly wanted out of life. But even as he embraced this new way of living, Michael knew that the challenges weren't over. He had made progress, but there were still obstacles to overcome, still decisions to be made. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was far from clear. For now, though, Michael was content to take things one day at a time. He had come a long way since that fateful day in the hospital, and he knew that he still had a long way to go. But he was no longer afraid of the journey ahead. He had faced his demons, confronted his weaknesses, and come out stronger on the other side. The road ahead would be difficult, but Michael Stone was ready for whatever came next. He had rediscovered his strength, his resilience, and his sense of purpose. And with those, he knew that he could face any challenge that lay ahead. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting its golden light across the sprawling estate that had once belonged to Michael Stone, the world outside seemed as peaceful and orderly as ever. But within the grand walls of the mansion, a storm was brewing. It wasn't a storm of thunder and lightning, but rather a tempest of emotions, decisions, and the consequences of choices that had been made long ago. And at the center of it all was a woman whose presence was as unexpected as it was profound. Daniela. Daniela had always been a mystery. To the casual observer, she was just another face in the crowd, a woman who went about her work with quiet diligence and humility. But those who took the time to look closer would see that there was something different about her, something that set her apart from the others who worked in the mansion. There was a strength in her gaze, a quiet confidence that spoke of a life lived with purpose and determination. And it was this very strength that would soon become the catalyst for a series of events that would change the lives of everyone in the house. Michael Stone had never been one to pay much attention to the staff who worked in his home. To him, they were simply part of the background, invisible yet indispensable, ensuring that his life ran smoothly without ever intruding on it. But Daniela was different. From the moment she arrived, there was something about her that caught Michael's attention, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't just that Daniela was good at her job, though she was. She had a knack for knowing exactly what needed to be done, often anticipating Michael's needs before he even realized them himself. But it was more than that. There was a quiet dignity about her, a sense of purpose that seemed out of place in the role she occupied. It was as if she were playing a part in a play, one that didn't quite fit her, but that she performed with grace and precision nonetheless. For months, Daniela went about her work in the mansion, unnoticed by most, but not by Michael. He found himself watching her, trying to understand what it was about her that intrigued him so. She was reserved, almost to the point of being distant, but there was a kindness in her eyes, a warmth that seemed to draw people in, even as she kept them at arm's length. Michael was no exception. He found himself wanting to know more about her, to understand what had brought her into his life. It wasn't long before Michael's curiosity got the better of him. One evening, after a particularly long and tiring day, he found himself sitting in the library, nursing a glass of whiskey and contemplating the state of his life. The room was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth and the soft rustle of pages as he absently flipped through a book he had no intention of reading. And then, as if summoned by his thoughts, Daniela appeared in the doorway. She was carrying a tray with a pot of tea and a plate of biscuits, her usual calm and composed expression in place. But there was something different in her eyes, something that Michael hadn't seen before. It was a look of concern, almost as if she could sense the turmoil that was brewing inside him. "Mr. Stone," she said quietly, setting the tray down on the table beside him. "I thought you might like something to help you relax." Michael looked up at her, surprised by the gesture. He had never known Daniela to go out of her way like this before. She was always professional, always maintaining the appropriate distance between employer and employee. But tonight, there was something different, something that made Michael feel as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Thank you, Daniela," he said, his voice a little rough from the whiskey. "But you didn't have to do this." She smiled then, a small, almost imperceptible smile, but one that lit up her face in a way that Michael hadn't noticed before. "It's no trouble," she said. "I just thought you could use some company." The words hung in the air between them, charged with a meaning that neither of them fully understood. Michael wasn't sure what to say, how to respond to the unexpected kindness. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on not needing anyone or anything. But as he looked at Daniela, standing there with that gentle smile, he realized that he was lonelier than he had ever admitted, even to himself. "Would you sit with me for a while?" he found himself asking, the words out of his mouth before he could think better of it. Daniela hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the implications of the request. But then she nodded and took a seat in the chair opposite him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a long time, they sat in silence. The only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional clink of glass as Michael sipped his whiskey. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Rather, it was a silence filled with understanding, with the unspoken knowledge that sometimes words weren't necessary. As the evening wore on, Michael found himself opening up to Daniela in a way that he hadn't with anyone in years. He told her about the pressures he was facing, the uncertainty that had crept into his life since the acquisition, and the sense of isolation that had grown stronger with each passing day. He spoke of his fears, his doubts, and the overwhelming burden of responsibility that weighed on him like a leaden cloak. Daniela listened quietly, her expression thoughtful, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't offer advice or platitudes, didn't try to fix his problems or tell him what he should do. Instead, she simply listened, allowing Michael to unburden himself in a way that he hadn't been able to with anyone else. And in that moment, Michael realized that what he had been searching for, what had drawn him to Daniela, was the simple need for human connection. That was a realization that shook him to his core. Michael had always considered himself a man of action, someone who thrived on challenges and thrived in the cutthroat world of business. But as he sat there, talking to Daniela, he realized that all the success, All the power and prestige he had accumulated over the years meant nothing if he didn't have someone to share it with. And in that moment, he understood just how lonely he had become. The days that followed that evening were different. Michael found himself looking forward to the moments when he would cross paths with Daniela, whether it was in the hallway, the kitchen, or the library. Their conversations, though brief, were a source of comfort to him, a reminder that he wasn't as alone as he had once thought. And as the days turned into weeks, Michael began to feel a change within himself, a shift in his perspective that he hadn't expected. He started to see the world differently, to appreciate the small moments of kindness and connection that he had once overlooked. He noticed the way Daniela took care of the house, the attention to detail she brought to every task, no matter how small. He saw the way she treated the other staff with respect and compassion, and how they, in turn, respected and admired her. It was as if she brought a sense of calm and order to everything she touched, a quiet strength that belied the challenges she must have faced in her own life. And yet, despite all this, Daniela remained an enigma to Michael. She never spoke of her past, never mentioned where she had come from, or what had brought her to his home. It was as if she had simply appeared one day, fully formed, with no history or baggage to weigh her down. But Michael knew that wasn't the case. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she sometimes seemed lost in thought, as if she were carrying a burden that she didn't want anyone else to see. That Michael's curiosity about Daniela grew with each passing day. He found himself wanting to know more about her, to understand what had shaped her into the person she was. But he knew better than to push her. Daniela was a private person, and he respected that. He also knew that trust was something that had to be earned, not demanded. So, he waited. He continued to enjoy their conversations, their moments of quiet companionship, all the while hoping that one day Daniela would feel comfortable enough to share her story with him. But as much as Michael wanted to know more about her, he also knew that it wasn't his place to pry. Daniela had her reasons for keeping her past to herself, and he would respect that until she was ready to open up. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. That it was a stormy evening when everything changed. The rain was coming down in sheets, the wind howling through the trees like a wild animal. Michael was in his study, going over some documents, when the power suddenly went out, plunging the entire house into darkness. He cursed under his breath, fumbling for his phone to use as a flashlight. But before he could find it, he heard a soft knock on the door. "Mr. Stone?" It was Daniela's voice, calm and steady, despite the chaos outside. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine," Michael replied, finding his phone and turning on the flashlight. "Just a little surprised by the blackout." "I thought you might be," Daniela said, stepping into the room with a candle in hand. "I brought this in case you needed some light." Michael couldn't help but smile at her thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Daniela. You always seem to know exactly what I need." She smiled in return, setting the candle down on the desk. "It's part of the job," she said simply. In the luxurious confines of Michael Stone's estate, life seemed to resume its normal rhythm after the storm. The flickering candlelight cast warm shadows on the walls, creating a cozy, intimate atmosphere in the grand study. Daniela's unexpected presence had been a source of comfort to Michael during the power outage. And as the storm raged on outside, it was clear that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The storm was fierce, with rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. Yet, inside the study, the atmosphere was calm. Daniela had taken a seat across from Michael, and their conversation had flowed naturally from discussing the storm to more personal topics. Michael had found himself increasingly drawn to Daniela's quiet strength and poise. Her presence had become a beacon of calm amidst the chaos in his life. However, the evening was not just about sharing light and warmth. It was a turning point, a moment when Daniela's life, hidden behind a veil of professional distance, began to intersect with Michael's in ways neither could have anticipated. Daniela had always been careful to maintain a boundary between her professional and personal life. She carried herself with a dignity that spoke of a past she chose not to discuss. Michael respected her privacy, but the enigma of her life outside the mansion had begun to pique his curiosity. That on that stormy night, as they spoke about their lives and aspirations, Daniela revealed a glimpse into her past. one that had been carefully guarded until now. Her voice was soft, her gaze distant, as if she were reliving a memory rather than sharing it. "I wasn't always in this line of work," Daniela began, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I used to work in a different world, one that was far removed from the quiet, orderly life here." Michael leaned in, intrigued. "What do you mean? What was it like?" Daniela took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Michael's with an earnestness that was both rare and revealing. "I was involved in a high-stress corporate environment similar to yours. I was working in a high-profile job, dealing with high-stakes projects, and facing relentless pressure. It was a world of constant competition and cutthroat business." Michael's eyes widened. It was as if Daniela was peeling back layers of her life, revealing a side of her he had never imagined. "What happened?" he asked gently. Daniela's expression grew somber. "I reached a point where I was on the brink of a breakdown. The stress was overwhelming, and I found myself caught in a vicious cycle of work and more work, with no time for myself or for the things that really mattered. It was only when I was forced to take a step back for health reasons that I realized how far I had strayed from who I really was." Her admission was both surprising and enlightening. Michael could relate to the pressure she described. It was a reflection of his own struggles, and hearing Daniela's story gave him a sense of shared understanding. "I decided to leave that world behind," Daniela continued. "I needed to find a way to live a life that was more balanced, more fulfilling. That's why I took this job. It's a different kind of work, but it's more aligned with the person I want to be." Michael was struck by Daniela's courage and self-awareness. Her decision to step away from a high-pressure career to seek a more meaningful life was something he admired deeply. It was a stark contrast to his own struggle to manage the pressures of his empire. As they spoke, the storm outside began to subside, and the first hints of dawn began to break through the clouds. The candlelight cast a warm glow across the study, and for the first time, Michael saw Daniela not just as a staff member, but as a person with a rich and complex past, a deeper connection. The following days were marked by an unspoken bond that had formed between Michael and Daniela. Michael found himself more introspective, considering the parallels between Daniela's past and his own life. Her story had resonated with him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and he began to view their interactions through a new lens. Daniela, in turn, seemed more relaxed around Michael. The professional distance that had once defined their relationship had softened, replaced by a genuine camaraderie. Michael found himself looking forward to their conversations, cherishing the moments of shared understanding and mutual respect. Their connection deepened, and Michael began to see Daniela in a different light. Her insights and perspectives were invaluable, and he found himself increasingly relying on her for guidance and support. Her ability to remain calm and centered, even in the midst of chaos, became a source of inspiration for him. As weeks turned into months, Michael's approach to his work began to change. He started to prioritize his well-being and the well-being of those around him. He implemented new policies at Connect Hub, focusing on work-life balance and mental health support. He encouraged his team to take breaks, to seek help when needed, and to foster a more supportive work environment. Daniela's influence was evident in these changes. Her story had highlighted the importance of balance and self-care, and Michael was determined to create a culture at Connect Hub that reflected these values. The company began to transform, moving away from the relentless pressure that had once defined it and towards a more humane and sustainable approach. Unexpected challenges. Despite the positive changes, not everything was smooth sailing. Daniela's past had left scars, and there were moments when the weight of her experiences resurfaced. Michael was sensitive to these moments, offering support and understanding, but he also knew that there were boundaries that needed to be respected. One evening, as they were working late in the study, Daniela received a phone call. Michael noticed the sudden shift in her demeanor, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. The conversation was brief, and Daniela quickly ended the call, but Michael could sense that something was amiss. "Everything all right?" Michael asked gently, his concern evident. Daniela took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "It was an old colleague, someone from my past. I thought I had left all of that behind, but it seems there are still some loose ends." Michael's heart ached for her. He understood that the past had a way of creeping back into one's life, no matter how hard one tried to move forward. "If you need to talk, or if there's anything I can do, please let me know," he said sincerely. Daniela nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Michael. It means a lot to me." As the weeks went by, Daniela's past continued to make occasional appearances, but Michael remained a steadfast support. He respected her need for space, but made sure she knew that she was not alone. Their relationship evolved into a deep and meaningful friendship, one built on mutual respect and understanding. The ripple effect, the changes at Connect Hub, and the growth in Michael's personal life were part of a larger transformation. The ripple effect of Daniela's influence was felt throughout the company and beyond. Michael's commitment to creating a healthier work environment had a profound impact on his employees, many of whom expressed their appreciation for the new policies and the focus on well-being. The culture at Connect Hub shifted from one of relentless ambition to one of balanced growth and support. Employees felt more valued and more engaged, leading to increased productivity and job satisfaction. The changes were a testament to the power of empathy and understanding, and they reflected the lessons that Michael had learned from Daniela's story. That AS for Daniela. She found a renewed sense of purpose in her work. Her decision to leave her past behind and embrace a new path had been validated by the positive changes she saw around her. She continued to work with dedication, contributing to the new culture at Connect Hub and finding fulfillment in her role. That Michael's journey, shaped by Daniela's influence, was a reminder of the interconnectedness of human lives. The lessons learned from one person's story had the power to transform not only the lives of individuals, but also the broader environment in which they lived and worked. As the sun rose on the final morning of their journey together, Michael and Daniela stood on the balcony of the estate, looking out over the sprawling landscape. The storm had passed, and the world seemed to have been cleansed by the rain. The air was fresh, and the promise of a new day was palpable. That Daniela's presence had brought a profound change to Michael's life. Her story had offered him a new perspective, a deeper understanding of the importance of balance and connection. Through their shared experiences, they had forged a bond that transcended the boundaries of employer and employee, becoming true friends in the process. That Michael's journey of transformation was far from over, but he had taken important steps towards creating a life that was both successful and meaningful. The ripple effect of Daniela's influence was evident in the changes at Connect Hub and in the way Michael approached his own life. It was a testament to the power of human connection and the profound impact that one person's story could have on another. As they stood together, the dawn of a new era was upon them. Michael and Daniela had navigated the storm together, emerging stronger and wiser. Their journey was a reminder that, even in the face of adversity, there was always hope, always the possibility of finding new paths and new beginnings. And as they looked out at the world before them, they knew that their story was just beginning.